The leaders of the European Union have welcomed the latest progress towards a peace plan in Ukraine. The President of the European Council mentions a new momentum.
The COP30 climate summit in Brazil concluded with a final text that avoided a roadmap for phasing out fossil fuels. Spain's Attorney General has resigned after being found guilty of leaking confidential information about the boyfriend of a leading opposition politician.
The European Union has welcomed the latest progress towards a peace plan in Ukraine. On the sidelines of a summit in Angola between the EU and Africa, the 27 leaders held an informal meeting on Monday following discussions between Ukraine, the United States and Europe. To the President of the European Council, they represent a new momentum.
The United States and Ukraine informed us that the discussions were constructive and that progress was achieved on several issues. We welcome this step forward, and some issues remain to be resolved, but the direction is positive.
The President of the European Commission emphasized that there was still work to be done, but also what she called a solid basis for moving forward. Ursula von der Leyen reiterated the fundamental principles for establishing a peace plan.
Ukraine's territory and sovereignty must be respected. Only Ukraine, as a sovereign country, can make decisions regarding its armed forces. The choice of their destiny is in their own hands. I also want to emphasize Europe's centrality in the country's future.
The leaders reiterated that the 27 must be fully involved in all decisions concerning the Union, such as enlargement towards Ukraine or the use of frozen Russian assets.
Over the weekend, the European Union has reportedly released a counter-proposal in response to the initial US-Russia framework, which was leaked last week. Now, the EU's plan includes major adjustments, including Ukraine's military kept at 800,000 troops in peacetime, rather than just 600,000 troops in the initially proposed plan. There is also a significant change regarding Kyiv's NATO aspirations. Ukraine joining NATO falls on consensus and agreement among the alliance's members, instead of NATO committing to not accepting Ukraine. Notably, there is also a point about NATO troops not being stationed on the territory of Ukraine under its command, but specifically in peacetime. One of the most important aspects of any possible deal for Kyiv concerns Russia's occupied territories of Ukraine, and the EU-led leaked plan drops the recognition of temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, which was included in last week's US-Russia framework. Now, the territory in question is Ukraine's Luhansk and Donetsk region, which altogether make up the region of Donbas. Moscow renewed its assaults against Ukrainian troops and Ukraine's territory in the region of Donetsk, specifically when it comes to the city of Pokrovsk. But according to the US-based Institute for the Study of War, even with the current pace and currently dedicated massive resources, Russian forces could seize the rest of Donetsk region only by August 2027. Most importantly, the leaked EU-led proposal brings back the idea of first having a ceasefire at the current contact line, and then for Ukraine and Russia to start the negotiations regarding the rest of the possibility, including the temporarily occupied territories. But this is the aspect that Moscow has been rejecting from the very beginning.
The COP30 climate summit in Brazil concluded with a final text that avoided a roadmap for phasing out fossil fuels, drawing criticism that described the outcome as an empty deal and a moral failure. Countries that attended the UN's flagship climate change conference, whose economies rely heavily on fossil fuel production, like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, were openly opposed to any such target or roadmap. One day before the end of COP30, the EU threatened not to endorse the final text, which had to be approved by consensus by nearly 200 nations. In the end, the EU did not see another option than backing the paper while recognizing its lack of ambition. Climate researchers and environmentalists say the outcome reflects a fragmentation within the international order. The absence of the US created a political and financial vacuum, and experts say the resistance from petrostates was too great for a roadmap towards phasing out fossil fuels to succeed. The outcome of this year's summit came 10 years after the historic Paris Agreement, when world leaders committed themselves to take real action against global warming.
Alvaro Garcia Ortiz has resigned as Spain's Attorney General just days after he was suspended for 2 years by the country's Supreme Court. The top prosecutor was found guilty of leaking confidential information about the boyfriend of a leading opposition lawmaker. The outgoing Attorney General announced his decision in a letter sent to Spanish Justice Minister Félix Bolaños on Monday. Ortiz stated in his letter that he was leaving before the Supreme Court executed his disqualification out of, quote, deep respect for judicial rulings and proceedings. He also added that his decision was rooted in his, quote, everlasting desire to protect the Spanish Public Prosecutor's Office. Ortiz was convicted after a months-long investigation and trial found him guilty last week on Thursday of sharing private information on Alberto González Amador, partner of Madrid Regional President Isabel Díaz Ayuso, who is being investigated for alleged fraud. Ortiz's resignation will only be made official once the Spanish Council of Ministers sign off on it, which is likely to happen on Tuesday.
Former French President Nicolas Sarkozy is publishing a book about his 3 weeks behind bars, set to hit shelves on December 10th. His publisher Fayard said the memoir, titled A Prisoner's Diary, is 216 pages long, just under 11 pages per day that Sarkozy spent in prison. Sarkozy, who was separated from the general prison population, trailed the release in a post on X. A quote from the book was also released as a teaser. In prison, there is nothing to see and nothing to do. Sarkozy was convicted in September of criminal conspiracy over a scheme to obtain campaign funds for his 2007 presidential race. A Paris court gave him a 5-year sentence, and he became the first former French president to end up behind bars since Nazi collaborator Philippe Pétain. He was released pending appeal on the 10th of November.
UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has suggested that the former Prince Andrew should testify before a US congressional committee investigating convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Starmer declined to comment specifically about King Charles' disgraced younger brother, but told reporters that he believes, as a general principle, people should provide evidence to investigators. The comments were made to reporters traveling with him as he flew to Johannesburg in South Africa to participate in the Group of 20 or G20 summit. The former prince, now known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, has so far ignored a request from lawmakers in the U.S. House of Representatives Oversight Committee to testify about his, quote, long-standing friendship with Epstein. The disgraced UK royal was accused by Virginia Joffrey, an Epstein victim, of sexual assault at one of the lavish parties the former financier organized on his Little St. James private island. She said she was forced by Epstein and his accomplice and longtime partner Ghislaine Maxwell to perform sexual acts on Andrew against her will while at the time only being 17 years old. Pressure is continuing to mount on the former royal, who was stripped of his title and duties last month, as the royal family tried to insulate itself from criticism about his relationship with Epstein.
Slovenians rejected a law in a referendum that allowed terminally ill patients to end their lives. Preliminary results showed that around 54% voted against the law, while 46% supported it. The law proposed that mentally competent people who have no chance of recovery or are facing unbearable pain have the right to assisted dying. Opponents to the law included conservative groups and activists, some doctors' associations, and the Catholic Church.
Hvala lepa vsem, ki so glasovali proti zastrupitvi bolnikov, invalidov in upokojencev. In to je velika zmaga za invalide, bolnike in upokojence. Zdaj so lahko mirni, lahko mirno praznujejo Advent in Božič.
Sunday's outcome means that an existing law passed by Parliament in July is now suspended. Advocates of assisted dying have argued that the law gives people a chance to die with dignity and decide for themselves how and when to end their suffering.
Uspeli so konzervativni krogi, uspela je RKC nadoločiti javno mnenje s svojimi lažmi, zavajanji in interpretacijami, da gre za zakon, ki globoko posega v človekovo življenje.
Backers of the law said they were disappointed, but expressed conviction a new legislation will be passed in the future. Several other EU countries have already passed similar laws, including Slovenia's neighbour Austria. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi said Japan crossed a red line after its new Prime Minister, Sanai Takaichi, made comments about a potential military intervention over Taiwan. The Japanese leader claimed that China's naval blockade or other action against Taiwan could be grounds for a Japanese military response. Wang slammed the statement as reckless and said China must respond to Japan's actions. Takaichi's remarks have led to rising tensions between the two countries over the past few weeks. Beijing considers the self-ruled Taiwan as its own territory. It has objected to the involvement of other countries in Taiwan, notably the United States and its allies in Asia, which includes Japan. Takaichi's stance is seen as more forceful than previous prime ministers who have expressed concern over China's threat to Taiwan but haven't publicly said how Japan would respond.